These are three terrifying true stories told by the people who lived them. Are you brave enough to hear what happened to Emily, Mark, and Sarah? They say there's no worse feeling than being helpless. For me, that night in December 2024, I learned just how terrifying helplessness could be. I was alone in my apartment, snow piling high against the windows when the first call came. By the time it ended, I knew my life would never be the same. It started like any other evening. The streets were silent under a heavy snowfall, and I was curled up on my couch with a cup of tea, scrolling through my phone. I live alone in a small apartment on the third floor of an old brick building. Not fancy, but cozy. Outside, the streetlights flickered through the flurries, casting strange shadows on the walls. I remember checking the time, 10:47 p.m. Too late to call anyone, but too early to head to bed. My cat, Luna, sat on the armrest, purring softly as I absently stroked her fur. Everything felt normal until my phone buzzed. It wasn't a text or a notification. It was a call from an unknown number. I hesitated. Usually I ignore these, but something made me answer this one. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice low. For a moment, there was nothing but static. Then a voice, soft, trembling, almost a whisper. "You have to help me." I froze. "Who is this?" "Please, you have to help me. He's in the house." The hairs on my arms stood up. "I think you have the wrong number," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "Call the police." "No," the voice said, more urgent now. "You don't understand. He's watching me." I tried to say something else, but the line went dead. I stared at my phone, my heart racing. It had to be a prank, right? Someone messing with random numbers? I wanted to believe that, but the voice, it sounded so real, so desperate. I tried to brush it off. I put my phone down and turned on the TV, hoping the noise would drown out my unease. Luna jumped down from the couch and padded to the window, her tail swishing. She stared outside, her ears twitching, as if she saw something I couldn't. "What is it, girl?" I asked, forcing a laugh. She didn't move. Another buzz. Another call. The same unknown number. My hand shook as I picked up the phone. "Hello." The same voice. "He's here." My stomach dropped. "Who are you? Where are you?" "He's outside the door," she whispered. Her voice broke, and I could hear her crying softly. "Please, I don't know what to do." "Call the police," I said again, louder this time. "Tell me where you are, and I'll call for you." There was a long pause. Then, so faint, I almost didn't hear it. "He's not outside anymore." I froze. "What do you mean?" "He's inside." A loud crash echoed through the phone, followed by muffled screams. I jumped up, nearly dropping the phone, but before I could say anything, the line went dead again. I stood there, my heart pounding, staring at the blank screen. Luna hissed, her back arching as she backed away from the window. I rushed to the door and checked the lock. Then the windows. Everything was secure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I thought about calling the police myself, but what could I say? That I'd received two strange calls from someone I didn't know? The snow outside seemed heavier, the shadows darker. And then, as I stood by the window, I saw it. A figure standing across the street, just barely visible under the streetlight. They weren't moving, just watching. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that figure. It felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. They never moved, not once. Just as I was about to convince myself it was a trick of the light, my phone buzzed again. My hands shook as I answered. "Who are you?" I demanded. "What do you want?" Silence. Then the sound of breathing. Heavy, ragged. And then, "Why did you let me in?" My blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about?" "I'm here," the voice said. And for the first time, I realized it wasn't the woman from before. This voice was deeper, colder, and far too close. I spun around, clutching the phone like it was a weapon. The living room was empty, but the shadows seemed darker, longer. I backed away toward the kitchen, my mind racing. Had I forgotten to lock a window? Was someone inside? The phone buzzed again. A video this time. My trembling fingers fumbled to open it. The screen showed my apartment, my couch, my TV, the very room I was standing in. The camera panned slowly, And then I saw myself, standing there, holding the phone, staring in disbelief. Behind me, a shadow moved. I dropped the phone and ran for the door. My hands fumbled with the lock, the metal cold and unyielding. I could feel it behind me, the air growing colder, the shadows closing in. Finally, the lock gave way, and I burst into the freezing night, my screams swallowed by the falling snow. When the police arrived, they found no sign of forced entry, no sign of anyone else in the apartment. Just my phone on the floor, the video still playing. There are places in this world that should never be found. I didn't believe that. Not until I stumbled upon a house that wasn't supposed to exist. I've tried to forget what happened that night in May 2024, but every time I close my eyes, I'm back there, standing in front of that house, hearing the screams inside. I was on my way home from a work trip, driving through the back roads of northern Michigan. The GPS had failed me. No signal in the dense woods, so I relied on the occasional hand-painted signs pointing toward the highway. It was getting late, and the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty road. I must have missed a turn because the road became narrower, the trees thicker. I slowed down, debating whether to backtrack, when I saw it, a faint light flickering through the trees. I figured it was a house, and maybe someone could give me directions. As I got closer, my heart sank. The house was old, its wood weathered and warped, with vines creeping up the sides. A single, dim light flickered on the porch. It didn't look like anyone had lived there in decades, but I was desperate. I parked the car and hesitated. The air felt different here, heavier, colder, even though it was late spring. Something about the house unsettled me, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. I knocked on the door, and the sound echoed unnaturally, like the wood was hollow. Nobody answered, but the door creaked open on its own. "Hello," I called out, peering inside. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the shadows. "I'm lost. I just need directions." The interior was dimly lit by a single candle on a table. Dust hung thick in the air, and the furniture looked as old as the house itself. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges, and I noticed dark stains on the wooden floor. I took a step inside. The floorboards groaned under my weight. "Hello," I called again, louder this time. That's when I heard it, a faint sound, like a child's laughter, coming from upstairs. I should have left then and there, but curiosity or stupidity, maybe both, kept me rooted. The laughter sounded again, clearer this time. It wasn't playful. It was wrong, hollow, like it was being mimicked by something that didn't understand joy. The staircase was narrow and steep, the banisters sticky to the touch. I climbed slowly, my heart pounding with every creak. At the top, the hallway stretched into darkness, but one door was slightly ajar, warm light spilling out. I approached cautiously. The room beyond was small, clearly a child's bedroom. A tiny bed with faded pink sheets sat in the corner, surrounded by broken toys. A music box rested on a shelf, its lid open, though it wasn't playing. On the floor was a child's drawing, scrawled in crayon on yellowed paper. It depicted a stick figure family standing in front of the house. But something about the drawing chilled me. In the background, there was another figure drawn in black crayon. It towered over the others, its face scribbled out. The laughter sounded again, this time right behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. The door to the room slammed shut, and I lunged for it, yanking it open. The hallway was different now, longer with more doors all closed. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. One of the doors at the end of the hall creaked open on its own. I didn't want to go further, but the open door seemed to pull me in. The air grew colder as I approached, my breath visible in the dim light. Beyond the door was a staircase leading down, though I was sure the house didn't have a basement when I'd looked from outside. The steps were uneven, the walls narrowing as I descended. The sound of my footsteps echoed unnaturally, as if the space was far larger than it seemed. At the bottom, the air was damp and smelled of earth and rot. I found myself in a cavernous room lit by candles placed haphazardly on the ground. The walls were covered in symbols, scratched into the stone, painted in what looked like dried blood. In the center of the room was a large wooden table, and on it was something covered with a sheet. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my legs moved on their own. I pulled the sheet back. Beneath it was a mirror, its surface black and rippling, as though it were liquid. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't right. It smiled when I didn't. Its eyes were darker, emptier. "Why are you here?" it whispered. I stumbled back, the mirror's surface rippling as though it were alive. The candles flickered, and the shadows on the walls began to move, stretching toward me. I turned and ran, the shadows chasing me, whispering my name. I don't know how I made it back to the hallway, but when I did, it was different again. The walls were cracked, the floor covered in dust and debris. Every door was gone except for one at the end of the hall, slightly open. Beyond it, I could see the faint glow of the porch light. I ran for it, not daring to look back. The laughter followed me, louder now, overlapping with voices whispering words I couldn't understand. As I reached the door, it slammed shut in my face. Something scratched at the wood from the other side, and a low growl filled the air. "You shouldn't have come here," a voice said, so close it felt like it was inside my head. The door burst open, and I stumbled out onto the porch, falling into the snow. The house groaned behind me, its walls seeming to buckle inward. I scrambled to my feet and ran to my car, not daring to look back. When I finally reached the highway, I pulled over, shaking. The house couldn't have been real. It didn't make sense. But as I sat there, trying to catch my breath, I saw it in my rearview mirror, the house, standing in the middle of the road, its porch light flickering. Some memories don't fade, no matter how much time passes. For me, it's the night I saw him for the first time. It was February 2024, a quiet Wednesday evening. I thought I was alone in my house, but the man in the window proved me wrong. It had been an ordinary day. I came home from work around 6 p.m., exhausted from back-to-back meetings. My house, a modest two-bedroom rental on the outskirts of town, felt unusually still that evening. The kind of stillness that makes you notice every creak and groan of the building. I made myself a simple dinner, pasta and a glass of wine, and settled onto the couch. My usual routine was to watch TV for a couple of hours before bed. The house was dark except for the soft glow of the living room lamp and the muted flicker of the television. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. I remember the time clearly, 8:23 p.m. I glanced up from my phone and noticed something out of place. Through the reflection on the darkened TV screen, I saw movement near the kitchen window. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light or maybe a tree branch swaying outside. But when I turned to look directly, there he was. A man stood outside, his face partially obscured by the shadows. He wasn't moving, just staring at me. My heart dropped. I froze, unsure of what to do. My first thought was to grab my phone and call the police, but I didn't want to take my eyes off him. For a few long seconds, neither of us moved. Then he took a single step back and disappeared into the darkness. I rushed to the window, pulling the curtain aside, but the yard was empty. No footprints in the snow, no sign that anyone had been there. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a neighbor walking by or my imagination playing tricks. But something about his face, the blank expression, the way his eyes never wavered, stayed with me. The next morning, I convinced myself the incident was just a strange coincidence. Maybe someone got lost, or I was overtired. I went to work, trying to shake the lingering unease. But when I returned home that evening, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The back door was unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it before leaving. I always double-check. My hands trembled as I reached for the doorknob. The lock wasn't broken. It was as if someone had opened it with a key. Inside, nothing seemed out of place. I checked every room, closet, and corner, but everything was as I'd left it. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. The air felt different, heavier, colder, as if the house itself were holding its breath. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the wind set my nerves on edge. Around 3 a.m., I heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from the living room. I stayed in bed, my heart pounding, straining to hear more. The tapping stopped, followed by a long, deliberate creak, as if someone was stepping slowly across the floor. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. "There's someone in my house," I whispered. The dispatcher assured me that an officer was on the way. I stayed in my room, clutching the phone like a lifeline, until I heard the knock at the front door. The police searched the house, but found no one. They said there were no signs of forced entry, no footprints outside. Just like the night before, it was as if nothing had happened. The following day, I decided to install security cameras. I didn't want to live in fear, constantly questioning if someone was watching me. By the evening, I had cameras set up around the house, their feeds linked to my phone. That night, I tried to relax, telling myself the cameras would catch anything unusual. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a notification. Motion detected at the back door. I froze. My heart raced as I opened the app. The feed showed the backyard, empty except for the snow swirling in the wind. Then the camera flickered. For a split second, I saw him again, the man from the window. He was standing just outside the frame, his face partially visible as he leaned toward the camera. His lips moved as if he were speaking, but no sound came through. I replayed the footage over and over, but the image only appeared for a moment. When I checked the live feed again, the yard was empty. I called the police, showing them the footage. They seemed skeptical, suggesting it might be a technical glitch or someone playing a prank. But I knew what I'd seen. That night, I barricaded myself in my bedroom. Every light in the house turned on. But at 3:15 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Motion detected at the front door. I didn't check the feed right away. I couldn't. My hands shook as I stared at the notification, my mind racing with possibilities. Finally, I opened the app. The front door camera showed nothing unusual, just the porch lights swaying in the wind. I breathed a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. The feed flickered, and the screen went black. When it came back, the camera was inside the house. It showed my living room, the couch, the TV, and him. He was sitting in my chair, staring directly at the camera. My heart stopped. I grabbed my phone and ran out of the house, not even bothering to put on shoes. I sprinted to my car and drove until I reached a nearby gas station. There, under the harsh fluorescent lights, I called the police again. When they arrived at my house, they found no one. The camera footage was gone, the devices wiped clean, but on the living room wall, scrawled in ash, were the words, "I'm always watching." I moved out the next day, breaking my lease and leaving everything behind. I'll try to move on, but some nights when the wind is quiet and the world is still, I swear I see him, his shadow in a window, his face in the dark. And I know he's still watching. If you've experienced something similar or know someone who has, share it in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales.